The Supreme Court has rejected the Texas lawsuit that would have seen the election results overturned. The quick gist is that Texas said these 4 states violated the Electors Clause of the Constitution by changing the election rules without approval of the state legislatures. All of a sudden, these states started pouring in 20 on one side, 20 on the other side, state lining up against state. 126 members of the Republican House signed onto this, but it has been struck down. And with this, my friends, many on the left are saying it's over for Trump. It is over and there is nothing he can do. But I'm here to tell you they're wrong. First of all, Alan West has alluded to seceding from the Union. And that's the big story we'll get to in a second. But my friends, there's one very, very simple thing that Donald Trump and his supporters can do right now to guarantee that he wins come Monday with the Electoral College vote. Why, the Geminids are coming on Monday. And with 120 meteors per hour and 74 million Trump voters and roughly about 10 hours of night, excluding dusk and dawn, 88.8 billion wishes that Donald Trump somehow wins on I'm kidding, by the way. That's not, I just thought it was funny. What they can actually do is, I don't know, maybe win their appeal in the Wisconsin Supreme Court, considering the Wisconsin Supreme Court is conservative, it's my understanding, from NPR. Wisconsin Supreme Court will take up Trump lawsuit appeal to overturn Biden win. Look, the Texas lawsuit was very clearly the best shot that Trump had, and it was the biggest with a rising tide on all sides, or both sides, rising up and saying yes and no. A major dispute of the election. The Supreme Court said Texas has no standing to sue based on how other states have their elections. I'm not a fan. I'm not a fan of that ruling. The way I see it is, imagine we enter into a contract that we're going to contribute something to let's say we all live together in an apartment. And I say we're all going to contribute to paying the rent. And we want everybody to pay the rent, freely and fairly. But one of your roommates is dealing drugs. You're going to be like, dude, wait, no way, man. You can't be doing that. And they're like, you have no right to determine how he pays his rent. Technically the truth. And maybe not a perfect analogy, but the point is, why should I be trapped in a contract with someone else who's doing unlawful things and then using that to get advantages over everybody else? So not a perfect analogy, but the point is, I think Texas's lawsuit made a lot of sense. I'm not a lawyer, and there's left-wing pundits and right-wing pundits who completely disagree on the merits. But the important thing is that the Texas lawsuit was not ruled on the merits. It wasn't. They just said Texas has no standing. Already there have been emergency filings by other lawyers claiming that their clients, I believe Sidney Powell and Lynn Wood may have filed something saying their clients do have standing. It's not, look, it's not over. It is a fact that it is not over. On November 7th, when they announced Biden was the winner, they kept saying, it's over. Give up. You know what the most annoying thing to me right now is? Seeing journalists tweeting memes at the president. I'm like, you're not journalists. One dude posts a moving truck in response to Trump, and I'm like, are you going to report the news? No, they're going to lie. I'll tell you, it is not over until Joe Biden is in the White House, and even then, it might not end. They don't get it. They don't understand what's happening. They think the Republican Party represents what's happening. It does not. So all of these Republicans sign on to the Texas lawsuit, in my opinion, because they saw what happened to Loeffler and Perdue. And so they said, okay, I'll voice my support for Trump. But short of that, Republicans ain't going to do anything. And Trump supporters know that, which is why, well, maybe there are some Republicans, because here's the actual big news. Texas GOP chair Alan West suggests law-abiding states should form a union after Supreme Court rejects lawsuit on election results. There's actually a state house rep in Texas who has proposed a bill to have Texas, I don't know if he wants them to secede from the union now, but to assert their right as a sovereign nation to be able to secede. Although I suppose many people are citing the first Civil War as how about that? As precedent that you have no right to secede. But this is the most important part, because I believe what we see here from Alan West better represents what people who support Trump are actually thinking. There have been, so I have Luke Rutkowski of We Are Change on the IRL podcast. He says we need a divorce. Then I have Michael Malice on the podcast as well. He wrote back in 2016, we need a divorce. Michael's a smart guy. He made a really great point. He said Barack Obama passes the ACA and then mandates everyone buy insurance, and that's considered acceptable. He says, then why not have a mandate that everyone buy a gun? Because that's starting the negotiation from the right-wing point of view. I think I'm probably getting the gist of his idea correctly. If not, you guys should follow him. He's a smart guy. We just had him the other night on the show. But it's an interesting point. Conservatives are always chasing the left. The left says, we're going to enact this policy, and the right says, no. How about the right says, we're going to enact this policy, and the left says no? How about you get a Republican who goes to Congress and say, I'm proposing a universal government gun program. It is a right in the Constitution. Why won't a Republican do that? Because the Republicans are just chasing after the left. And I feel like for the most part, for the longest time, well, I don't know about the longest time, but at least for the recent history, Republicans have just been sitting there like lazily, half, their arms up and their eyes half closed like that Bugs Bunny meme. And the Republicans come in and say, I'm angry about this thing. And they go, oh, I'll yell at them. And then it goes to Congress and a Republican goes, you Democrats with your Obamacare. Okay. Anyway, lunch. And then they leave. Take a look at what Trump said about, Obamacare and all this stuff. He did get rid of the individual mandate, which was huge. But did they get rid of Obamacare? Did they create something new? They didn't. Trump did some stuff, but I think people on the right who follow Trump and support him have been actually waiting for their side to actually propose and do something. But what do we get? Demands for universal health care and a big debate over whether that should be the case. Literally no debate from a right perspective on what universal program they would want. Perhaps it's because the Republicans don't want the government to be spending all of that money because it kind of defeats the purpose. And that's probably, one of the biggest problems with universal health care in general. But you don't get a right-centric proposal the left freaks out about for the most part. So check it out. Regular people now. Here's what we're seeing. The chairman of the Republican Party of Texas has suggested law-abiding states should form a union after the Supreme Court rejected the Texas lawsuit. The court's decision was made on Friday evening after the lawsuit was brought forth by Texas Attorney General Ken Paxton this week and backed up by President Trump, 16 other attorneys, and 126 members of Congress. The lawsuit sought to throw out millions of votes in the 4 battleground states of Georgia, Michigan, Pennsylvania, Wisconsin. The chairman of the GOP, Alan West, and Alan West is not some random dude. Alan West is a prominent figure. He said, quote, the Supreme Court, in tossing the Texas lawsuit that was joined by 17 states and 106 congressmen, let me slow down there. It was joined by 19 states and 126 congressmen, have decreed that a state can take unconstitutional actions and violate its own election law, resulting in damaging effects on other states that abide by the law, while the guilty state suffers no consequences. This decision establishes a precedent that says states can violate the U.S. Constitution and not be held accountable. This decision will have far-reaching ramifications for the future of our constitutional republic. Perhaps law-abiding states should bond together and form a union of states that will abide by the Constitution. They say West is a retired U.S. Army lieutenant colonel and was a U.S. congressman in Florida from 2011 to 2013. He was elected as chairman of the Texas GOP July 20th, 2020, unseating former chairman James Dickey. Friday's decision was the second this week by the Supreme Court regarding requests by Republicans to get the nation's highest court involved in the election results. The court had rejected an appeal from Republicans in Pennsylvania on Tuesday. That's not true. I'm just so sick of the media and they don't try. They're going to say the Electoral College will meet on Monday, December 14th. So there is news in the Republican lawsuit pertaining to Act 77 in Pennsylvania. They denied emergency injunctive relief, which for all intents and purposes is probably a defeat for the Republicans, because if the election gets certified and the electors are counted, then or the electoral vote. Oh, let me slow down. Challenging the election law in Pennsylvania may not actually have anything to do with this election. Kind of. We'll see. Mike Kelly and Sean Parnell are plaintiffs on this, among other people. And Sean Parnell said they don't know what the relief will be. Maybe it won't be to throw out this election, but to say in the next election, you need a constitutional amendment to do mail-in voting, which would still be a really good thing for Republicans. What the Supreme Court said is they denied emergency injunctive relief. This means Biden electors will go to the Electoral College on Monday, likely cast their votes, and that's it. But the Supreme Court has not dismissed the case. It's still pending. Does that mean they'll pick it up? Still, probably not. But now the latest development is that Parnell and the other plaintiffs have asked for I forgot what it's called, a writ of cert or something. They've requested cert. They want the case to be ruled on the merits, regardless of emergency injunctive relief. What happens if, come the 14th, they send 20 electors from Pennsylvania just for Biden, and then they cast their votes? But then between December 14th and January 6th, when the votes start to be counted, the Supreme Court actually says, yes, this was unconstitutional. Toss it out. Well, then on January 6th, the Republicans are going to raise objections saying the Supreme Court ruled that your votes don't count. The left keeps saying it's over. There are a few leftist personalities, with respect. I don't want to drag them, but they've been warning the left. It is not over until Joe Biden is in the White House. And you also need to understand, just because Joe Biden's in the White House doesn't mean that Trump goes away and his supporters give up. I don't think they will. I think Trump is leading the charge of something that's not just about the Republican Party. It's a right populist movement. And I mean, look at what Alan West said about a union of states forming their own, union that will abide by the Constitution. Yeah. What if Trump said, I would like to be that leader? And then you have a factionalization or a divorce or a splitting. You know, Michael Malice said the other day on the IRL podcast, there's this blue-pilled view that civil war is always violent, but there could be a peaceful decoupling of the United States. I don't know. I think that's a really, really bad thing for a lot of reasons. We're a great nation. And many Republicans have said, you can't take our states, these big cities. But there's interesting points to be made about what goes on in this country and the different cultural issues. Look, you have one side that says children that are trans should be able to get chemical treatments to affirm their identity. On the right, they say absolutely not. No way. Joe Biden supported this specifically, saying there should be no discrimination if a child chooses to be transgender. Without condemning or condoning, I'm just pointing out, I mean, that is a very, very disparate. These are so far removed from each other. When I was talking to Jack Dorsey and Vijay Gadde in the Joe Rogan podcast, one of the most important things brought up was that their rules are biased for the left. They have a misgendering policy on Twitter that if you call someone who is trans by the, not the correct pronouns, by pronouns they don't want, you've broken the rules. And I said, that is only a thing in the left. The right doesn't, the right has an inverted view of misgendering. Thus, we have two very different realities here. So what do? Keep fighting each other until both sides, politically, until both sides just take it, it comes to street clashes, which apparently there was fighting last night in D.C. And there's going to be a huge rallies today in D.C. as well. They're marching on the Supreme Court and through D.C. for Trump, Stop the Steal rally, all that stuff. We're getting to a point where the cultures are so far removed from each other. Seriously, the right to bear arms, the right to run your business. One side says the pandemic, lock everything down. Nobody works. Government pays for it. The other side is saying, let me live my life and take my own risks. Those can't work together. And now you're getting people essentially rising up in the streets and saying no to this. Maybe what makes the most sense is a union of states that they tends to agree with each other. The issue is the East Coast and the West Coast, the blue states, the red states. There's no clear dividing line like North and South. So what? The West Coast becomes its own place. The East Coast becomes its own place. You wouldn't just get two countries. You'd get three or four. I remember that old internet meme from, I think it was John Titor or John Titor. I can't remember. I don't know how to pronounce his name. For those that aren't familiar, it was this old meme where somebody claimed to be from the future. They weren't. It was probably just, a blog where a guy was making stuff up, but predicted that the U.S. would fracture into four different countries. The East Coast would be very much aligned with Europe. The Midwest, the northern Midwest areas would be aligned with Canada. The West Coast would be aligned with China, and the South would be fairly independent or working with Mexico. I think it's just silly internet memes from back in the day of people speculating. But it seems that there's something that could be a real possibility of this. If the U.S. was to actually break up, as to what Alan West was saying, we would no longer be a global power. There would be questions as to who controls the military bases around the world, who would be in charge of them. Probably Washington, D.C., and the other states would say no. There are many economists who are saying if the red states broke away from the blue states, they would be a third world nation. Sure, except you're now miscounting the fact that The blue states have destroyed their economies and aren't producing much, but they're dragging everybody down. The GDP is tanking in many of these places. And New York just shuttered indoor dining. So is Philadelphia. I believe Los Angeles has. So, and outdoor. So at this point, I think the red states might just be okay. But, there is something to be said about red states being sparsely populated to a certain degree and not having as large of urban centers. But you also got to understand that places like New York State is, you get rid of New York City and it's a red state. You get rid of Chicago and Illinois is a red state. And for California, you've got San Francisco and you've got Los Angeles, but it's very much red in a lot of ways. So if these cities, which are, massive portions of the population, were not included, you wouldn't have a blue state. Of course, these cities literally can't sustain themselves without support from the agricultural and rural areas. Let me tell you what's going on. All right. The other day when I talked about 44 states disputing the president, and now we're learning Supreme Court said no. The specific point I was trying to make is no one cares. Like they do, right? The Trump supporters were hoping the Supreme Court would intervene and say, you guys, all right, Trump wins. The left was like, no, they'll dismiss it. Well, the Supreme Court effectively sided with the left on this one. Does that mean the Trump supporters are going to be like, well, good game, guys? No. It means they're going to start defying. What I think we're going to start seeing is in the next 6 months or so, into the next year, Stuart Rhodes of the Oath Keepers has already said they won't regard anything out of Joe Biden's mouth as legitimate. Not just him, like half the country. So that certainly means at least the Oath Keepers won't. They're going to. Joe Biden wants a nationwide lockdown. He didn't say it personally. He said, I'll follow the science. And his chief advisor, the guy he brought on, said 6 weeks lockdown. But Joe Biden did say national mask mandate. I think because of the draconian edict that is being passed down by these governors and what's soon to be Biden, plus with the lawlessness from the far left, you're going to have areas just saying, we object, we reject. So you're going to have a bunch of people on the right in rural areas saying, we don't do that here. And what's the U.S. government going to do? Send in, federal agents to enforce mask laws? Probably not. So Joe Biden's plan just will not work. But let's say there's a more densely populated area, not particularly large, but maybe a decent sized city of a couple 100,000 in a red state. Maybe they just say, you know what, we're done. Lockdown's over. Biden is not the president, something like that. Well, then Biden may actually send in DHS or some kind of enforcement. You will probably then end up seeing right-wing militias or even local sheriffs setting up checkpoints and saying, you can't come in here. These rules can't be enforced. I think maybe the first thing you'll see is some kind of federal enforcement. Maybe the CDC might go to an area and then tell these restaurants you have to lock down. The restaurants will say, get out. So the sheriffs are going to be like, this is our town. They'll say no. The fear I have, and I'm not saying it's extremely likely, I'm just saying I view this as a strong possibility. People will start rejecting these edicts as unconstitutional and a violation of their rights. But then a bigger question emerges. If we can reject this, why not anything else? Interestingly, the other day, when we were last night on the IRL podcast, we did a show. It was Alex Jones and Michael Malice, the round 2, because they banned, they took down the first one. So we did it again. Michael Malice mentioned that he thought all cops were corrupt and he wants to abolish the police. And he actually made a really important point. He says the Constitution guarantees his right to bear arms, and because of these police, he cannot protect himself in New York City. It's a good point. Every single cop in New York will violate the Second Amendment as it's written. What happens when people think like Michael does and they live in a city and they say, I'm not going to follow this edict and that law is unconstitutional and we all know it, and they no longer have confidence in those officers or in that law? What happens when even the cops in these smaller towns say, good point? Because we already saw sheriffs all across Virginia say when Virginia tried passing these gun control laws, they wouldn't enforce it. Well, what about the big cities that do just blindly enforce their gun control laws in violation of the Constitution? The blue cities, if they don't want to have weapons, then by all means, they can choose not to do it. But the Constitution guarantees the right, the people who live there, the right to do so. To throw back to Michael's point, 2 different countries. There are people who live in these cities who say I have a constitutional right to bear arms, and many who vote away that, but you can't because the Constitution says you can't. Apparently, the Constitution is meaningless, as we're learning now, sort of, with this Texas lawsuit. The important thing is the Supreme Court ruled the Constitution itself says, Article 3, they don't have standing. We'll see if these new lawsuits that have been filed will actually get heard on the merits because the individuals do have standing. Or they'll say, for those not familiar, standing basically means like, if I enter into a contract with you, like my neighbor can't sue you if you break it. They're like, you're not party to this contract. Texas is, and it's interesting that, the Supreme Court made their decision. They did. We'll see how that plays out. In the meantime, we're seeing things like this. Andy No tweets, arrested at police raid on Portland Antifa squat on 8th of December. Police recovered stockpile of guns. Antifa and other extremists then built an autonomous zone. Then we have this tweet. Antifa's Portland autonomous zone has a militia who are armed with semi-automatic rifles and other firearms. So let me go back to what I said about right-wing individuals setting up checkpoints saying y'all can't come here. You think I'm just making that up and just throwing something at the wall? I don't know, maybe some magical thing will happen. And no, I'm looking at a video of the far left having already done this twice now, setting up autonomous zones in cities where people with guns set up checkpoints and say, y'all can't come in. These are our rules. And they've killed people. In Seattle, a couple teenagers in a truck, they pumped 300 rounds in over a few minutes. You can hear the audio. Pop, 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 pop. It's crazy. So when I say you will likely see right-wing individuals in militias in certain areas set up checkpoints and say, this is an autonomous zone, don't be surprised if you see more of this and you see the right doing it because they're destroying the businesses of regular Americans. How many regular people are going to be like, these CDC types, he can't come in here. We don't respect that. And maybe it's by design. Maybe it's what everybody wants, a divorce. Now, interestingly, the left and the right populists got a lot to agree on. The left came out and said, we're not going to allow this eviction. They set up an autonomous zone and they have guns and they're guarding it and they're winning and they're expanding. Why wouldn't the right do that when I'm talking about a community that has a sheriff who's already been given powers of law enforcement, and the community tells the sheriff, we demand you protect the right for us to work and live. In my opinion, it makes way more sense that the right would do something like the left is doing in a more controlled, organized, and legitimate fashion than the left is even doing. But I'll put it this way. If the left is already doing it, it's not a long shot and it's not far-fetched to assume at some point you will see right-wing individuals doing something like this. We've already seen it. When the riots erupted, regular people, I don't even want to say right-wing, took out their guns and were standing around their communities, standing guard. It's already happened. We may see the decoupling of this country because I'll tell you this. If there's one thing the populist left and right completely agree upon, over 100 million people probably at this point, is that Joe Biden is awful. Not necessarily illegitimate. That's the Trump supporters who think that. But the left, they hate Joe Biden too. They just didn't like Trump. They hated Trump more. These progressives absolutely detest Joe Biden, but wanted him to win. Why? As many have said on social media, it's easier to overthrow a feeble old man than it is a fascist. They use the election as a way to take away the power of the right and Trump so they can more easily get what they want. Seizing land, was like a 3 or 4 block radius in Portland. And they're armed and they're standing guard. And with Joe Biden in the presidency, nothing will stop them. Perhaps top cop Kamala Harris might, but I'm not entirely convinced. And if it comes down to the federal government trying to assert authority over these areas, when Donald Trump was trying to stop the violence, Trump supporters agreed. If in a few months, Joe Biden is president and the autonomous zone in Portland has expanded completely out of the control of the local authorities, if Joe Biden tries sending in DHS, do you know what's going to happen? Trump supporters are going to laugh and say, we don't support any of you. You're on your own. We don't care. The left will say, get out. The feds will have absolutely no support in their action. And that's when legitimacy falters. Now, I'll wrap it up with this. Maybe everything goes back to normal. Everybody got it out of their system. We're all tired. We just want to play video games and just say, fine, whatever, it's Biden. High five, shake hands, go about our business. Maybe. I don't think so because they're going to be locking everybody down and it's going to be they're going to be locking everybody down. That's going to make people lose it. While they're locking down conservatives, the left is freely going about their business and seizing territory with guns. At least in this small scale, sure. Do you think conservatives and Trump supporters are going to be like, oh, geez, the feds are coming in to oppress us and letting the left get away with it. No, they're going to be like, get out. But we can only wait and see. Maybe Alan West is right and people are going to follow suit. Maybe Trump would be that leader and that will be freaky. I have no idea what's going to happen. I just want to wrap up one more point. You know, when I kept saying I felt like we were on the track for a civil war and people kept saying no, at what point do you say, okay, at the very least, we've been on the track. Maybe now we're going to get off it. Sure. But when I said 2 years ago, and now we're at the point where all these states are lining up against each other, the left is setting up autonomous zones with guns, aren't we closer than we were then? So I was certainly right then. And I'll say today, I think we're still on this track, but I don't know what's going to happen. Maybe everyone does calm down. People are tired of this stuff. They're just tired and they're going to say, I don't care. But you know, it was a very tiny fraction of people who fought in the Civil War. We'll see how it plays out. Next segment's coming up at 1 p.m. on this channel. Thanks for hanging out, and I will see you all then.